of what we're getting is amateur video. It's come to us over social networking sites and YouTube. We have no way of independently verifying its content. But there is repeated word that police have been firing on crowds with tear gas and water cannons. In some cases, we're told, live bullets. Coming up, what's said to be a video by a young woman who was beaten by police. It is so graphic, we cannot show you most of it. There are also reports of helicopters pouring some sort of liquid, hot liquid it was described, acid-like by others, pouring from a helicopter, that liquid on crowds below. We cannot confirm or verify that in any way. Hundreds of thousands of Iranians have taken to the streets in the past week, ever since the hardline president Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was declared the victor in last week's election for president. The more moderate challenger, though not much, Mir Hussein Mousavi, claims the vote was rigged, insisting he's the real winner. Tonight, that de facto leader of the opposition is calling for his followers to stage a national strike if he's arrested. He's warning the government to allow legal protests or face what he calls dangerous consequences. That leader also says he's ready now to become a martyr. Amy Kellogg has reported extensively from inside Iran. She and other Western journalists have been banned from there, so she's been reporting on the situation from London, working her sources inside the country. Amy, what's the latest you've been hearing from inside Iran?
The latest, Shep, I mean, you've gone through a lot of the brutality and the fighting and the demonstrations today, but I think the words coming out of Mousavi are very significant, that he's prepared to take this to the end, that he's prepared for martyrdom. And I think what, having spent a lot of time in Iran, strikes me today is that this is people taking matters into their own hands. So many Iranians have said to me over the years, Shep, that they want change in their country, that they want it to come from themselves and from within. And that is what we are witnessing on the streets today, and what we've been witnessing all week, and in fact what we've been witnessing since this very boisterous election campaign began in earnest about a month ago, is people just demanding their rights, demanding the change that they want. And Mousavi, quite frankly, though you did point out, Shep, that he is not the most liberal person in terms of his background, represents something very different to what we've seen in the past with this regime. People in his camp, Shep, even have, for example, a much more moderate stance about Israel and have indicated a willingness to embrace a two-state solution down the road. So, in fact, these are changes that, while can't be implemented right now, are things that people are talking about actively and demanding on the streets of Tehran and other cities tonight.
All right, Amy, one of the things for which we've been watching is any signs of cracks within the police force. If the police force, some of them, all of them, were to not go along with the orders of the government, then these protests would be able to continue. What do we know about the police?
Shep, I got a phone call, well, it was secondhand. I was speaking to a friend whose niece called in from Tehran, 22-year-old student who was at the protest today. She said that she passed so many police officers who were simply turning a blind eye to the protesters. Now, of course, we are seeing footage of people getting beaten, so clearly it's not everyone, but if you talk about a split, this may be representative. These are Tehran police officers whose boss today on television gave orders to his people to crack down on protesters and warn protesters not to go out. I heard earlier in the week from Iranians that they had that certain police officers or possibly special forces had said to some of the protesters, "Come on, guys, go home. We're tired." So, though traditionally we've always thought that all of these security guys were in lockstep with Ahmadinejad, I don't think that's the case. I think some of them don't have an appetite for violence right now, but we'll see how this plays out tomorrow and in the coming days.
Yeah, lots of changes probably ahead. Amy, you were talking about the differences, however subtle, and apparently some of them are not so subtle, between the hardline ruler, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, and this, what has become really a de facto leader of all the protests on many different levels, Mir Hussein Mousavi. You mentioned that Mousavi had not as strong a stance against Israel, and it even talked about the possibility of a two-state solution. What other differences are real between the two, and what ones might be perceived by the people there?
Yeah, I mean, Mousavi hasn't come out and said that about the two-state solution, but he came down really hard on Ahmadinejad in the debates about all of the rhetoric about Israel and the Holocaust denial. And people in his camp have indicated a willingness to embrace a two-state solution. Other differences, I think the point right now is that the movement is leading him more than he leading the movement. I think in the past he was very much of a socialist. He presided as prime minister over some of the darkest days of the Islamic Republic in terms of repression, but he kind of pulled himself back from politics, and he seems to have changed in very many ways in terms of just an opening of perspective. And I think that his wife being so prominently involved in the campaign was a really big deal. It sent a message to Iranian women and to society at large that women play a very important role in society. You never see Mrs. Ahmadinejad out and about. You don't typically see wives of leaders in Iran, and that was a very big deal. He had spoken about trying to bring women into cabinet positions, which hasn't really been done in the past. And when you think of the fact that 60% of the university body in Iran is made up of women, and many of these women have dealt with a serious glass ceiling, this would really engage such a big part of the population in ways they haven't been before, if he were, say, to become leader at some point.
That would be a fascinating turn. Amy, you know, we were getting these reports of a suicide bombing at the shrine of the Ayatollah Khomeini, who was the leader of the '79 revolution there in Iran. What do we know specifically?
Iranian sources here in London told me that they didn't really believe that this happened at all. Iranian TV did show some pictures of damage to the shrine. The reason people were incredulous is that it didn't really make sense why someone would blow up outside of that shrine. Of course, there may have been a motive, there may be a claim, there may be a note that comes out. 2 people at least, we understand, have been killed, but it wouldn't make sense really. It doesn't fit into the agenda of either side. That's a holy place, and even if you are anti-government or anti-Islamic system, I don't think that you'd necessarily think to go do something like that. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. There are groups, though, there are other groups that have been discussed in terms of potential suspects for this, like this Mujahideen cult, which is an organization deemed by many countries to be a terrorist organization. Iran is really concerned about them. They've stirred unrest over the decades in Iran. But that's just speculation, Shepard. People have been saying that maybe they could have been responsible. We know so little right now, but it looks like it did, in fact, probably happen, Shep.
Amy Kellogg at our newsroom in London. We wish you could be there, Amy, as I know you do.
Yeah, me too.
I know you do. Thanks so much, Amy Kellogg. There's more disturbing video to show you right now. We're told this was shot on the front lines at the very moment when the authority meets the rebellion. These particular images sent to us through Facebook, we're told this scene moments after police charged the crowds. Here's a wider shot of the forces lined up with shields and masks. You really barely make out the police batons being twirled around as demonstrators rush to confront them and run to avoid them. Some more video coming in for more on how unstable Iran could threaten the United States and its allies. Let's bring in our terrorism analyst, Waleed Fares. Waleed, it's good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
This rebellion started about internal economics, then became about young people and women's rights, and has slowly evolved. Left in the background is the fact that Iran's trying to develop a nuclear weapon, and we're going to have to deal with somebody on that at some point. How does this affect all of that?
Well, it does very much, and I think that the regime, Chef, made 2 strategic mistakes. One, by underestimating the reaction of people who were inside the regime, such as Mousavi, and who would be frustrated with elections under fraud like this one, but something else as well. They underestimated the power of a widening youth revolt that has begun in 1999, and we are exactly 10 years after, with more technologies. So that the marriage between reformers from within the regime and this vast, popular uprising made of students, women, NGOs, cab drivers, bus drivers, and possibly in the next few days, Chef, minorities, really shows that the regime has made a mistake.
You know, sometimes these movements are much more about the movement than the leader, and I say that because in this case, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and Mousavi have both been so close. I mean, think about this. When Ahmadinejad was younger, he was in the Basij, this paramilitary group, and at the same time, Mousavi, this de facto leader of this revolution, if you will, he was the prime minister.
Oh yes, he was a prime minister, but The trajectory of reformists is very, very peculiar in history. Remember, at the end of the Soviet Union, Boris Yeltsin, who brought down basically the Communist Party, was a member of the Communist Party. Gorbachev, who did the reforms, was also a member of the Communist Party.
Exactly.
At some point, they break away from the regime. And what we see here are leaders such as Mousavi, who are breaking away from the regime. I don't think they're going to be the final leaders on the long run. The opposition is using them to break away from that mullah regime, and after that there will be one party among many other parties in any national unity government if they defeat the foes.
Iran has always worked very hard to send this message. In Iran, we are one people of one thought, and the United States is awful. The United States is our evil enemy. Well, now what they see is the United States allowing this to go forward without, as the president would put it, a lot of meddling, but a strong statement today in support of the demonstrators and in opposition to the government's crackdown thereon. You wonder if one of the